The grand hall of the Galactic Senate shimmered with cold, sterile light. Every surface gleamed with the sleek, inorganic perfection of the Empire's architecture. James Hunt stepped into the chamber, his polished black suit a sharp contrast to the flowing robes and metallic carapaces of the alien dignitaries who filled the circular tiers above. Eyes followed him, their gazes heavy with disdain and curiosity. A murmur rippled through the room, alien tongues buzzing like static in his ears. A human. Here. He strode forward with measured precision, the weight of humanity's fragile position in the galaxy pressing down on his shoulders. The Senate's presiding sovereign, an imposing, 8-limbed creature with translucent skin that shimmered like oil on water, raised an appendage to silence the murmurs. Earth sends its emissary, the sovereign intoned, its voice smooth but dripping with condescension. And yet, one must ask, does a species so young belong among us? The room erupted in laughter, the sound alien and discordant. Hunt smiled, a calm, practiced expression. He stood before the sovereign's elevated podium, his posture straight, his gaze unwavering. Belonging, Hunt began, his voice steady, isn't dictated by age or size. It's proven through action. The sovereign leaned forward, its shimmering form casting an iridescent shadow over Hunt. And what action, Earthling, has earned you this audience? Before Hunt could respond, the chamber dimmed slightly, a subtle shift that sent a prickle down his spine. His eyes flicked to the corners of the room, noting the sudden, almost imperceptible movements of armored guards who had been stationed as mere ornamentation moments ago. A test. The thought crystallized as the first blow came. A blur of motion from his left, a guard lunged with a weapon that emitted a pulse of blue energy. Hunt sidestepped, the beam scorching the air where he'd been standing a heartbeat earlier. Gasps echoed through the chamber as Hunt spun, his movement sharp, precise, and far too quick for a mere diplomat. More guards closed in, their attack coordinated. Hunt dropped low, snatching a piece of broken tech from a shattered console and hurling it into the lead guard's helmet. The alien staggered back as Hunt pivoted, using the momentum to disarm another, twisting its weapon into his grasp. A sharp crack reverberated as he struck with the weapon's blunt edge, sending the guard sprawling. Hunt's heart pounded, but his expression remained cold, almost mechanical. The carefully constructed persona of a harmless diplomat was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper, a predator in a tailored suit. The room had erupted into chaos. Alien dignitaries hissed and shrieked, recoiling from the unexpected spectacle. Yet Hunt was already calculating, his mind a blur of strategies. This wasn't just an attack, it was a statement. A lesson. They wanted to humiliate Earth, to remind humanity of its place. But they hadn't counted on him. In the brief pause that followed, Hunt stood amidst a circle of fallen guards, his chest heaving slightly. He locked eyes with the sovereign, who had risen from its throne, its translucent skin pulsing with what might have been alarm. This, Hunt said, his voice low but cutting through the noise, is how Earth responds to insults. The sovereign raised its appendage again, a signal that made the remaining guards halt. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, with deliberate calm, Hunt turned, walking out of the chamber. Behind him, whispers began to ripple through the stunned assembly, the narrative already shifting. They had attacked the human diplomat, thinking him weak. They didn't know he was far more dangerous than that. The corridor stretched endlessly, its walls pulsing faintly with an alien energy source. Hunt moved through the dimly lit space, his breathing steady despite the urgency. His hand brushed along the wall, fingers feeling for inconsistencies, and then paused. A panel. He pressed firmly, and it slid open with a faint hiss, revealing a utility conduit. Perfect. Climbing inside, he took a moment to recalibrate. The ambush had been deliberate, and the Empire wasn't done. He could feel them closing in, their presence a faint vibration in the air, amplified by the alien tech embedded in the walls. His mind raced, cycling through tactics, inventorying the limited tools he'd scavenged during the chaos. A shard of broken plating. An alien energy cell. A length of cabling stripped from a fallen console. Primitive weapons in a high-tech trap, but they'd have to do. Diplomat, he muttered under his breath, a bitter edge to his voice. Should have retired when I had the chance. Memories clawed at the edge of his focus. Training missions in the dead silence of black space. Faces he couldn't forget, missions that had carved into his soul. He pushed them aside and forced his breathing steady. That life was supposed to be over. Yet here he was, slipping back into it with muscle memory honed from years of Black Ops work. A faint sound reached his ears, soft, calculated footsteps. They were here. He shifted his position, gripping the makeshift weapon tightly. A shadow moved across the vent opening, and in one swift motion, Hunt jammed the cabling into the energy cell. The crude device flared to life, sending a burst of electricity through the unsuspecting guard. The alien convulsed and crumpled to the floor. Hunt dropped down silently, retrieving the fallen guard's weapon. His eyes flicked to the alien's form, noticing the way its breathing apparatus shimmered faintly under the dim light. Weak point logged. As he moved deeper into the labyrinthine corridors of the facility, Hunt began dismantling his pursuers one by one. A quick strike to dislodge a breathing mask here, an improvised trap using their own energy shields there. They relied too heavily on their technology, assuming it made them untouchable. Against Hunt, it only made them predictable. Meanwhile, miles above, Admiral Kalos observed the chaos through a series of holographic displays. His reptilian eyes narrowed as reports flooded in, guards eliminated, systems disrupted, the human unaccounted for. A single Earthling, he hissed, his voice a mix of contempt and unease. And you can't handle him? One of his subordinates, a spindly creature with glowing, segmented eyes, quivered under the weight of Kalos's glare. The human, it's not as primitive as we believed. It adapts. Quickly. Kalos's scaled hand slammed against the console. Humans are nothing. Primitive scavengers from a dying world. Do not insult the Empire by implying otherwise. Still, Kalos couldn't ignore the pattern. The reports were too detailed, the tactics too precise. This was no ordinary diplomat. He tapped into the tactical network, issuing direct orders to the remaining teams. Flush him out. Cut off all escape routes. And when you have him cornered, do not hesitate. Back in the facility, Hunt pieced together scraps of data from stolen devices. Each victory gave him more insight into his enemy. Maps, communication logs, even fragments of intercepted orders. Slowly, the bigger picture came into focus. The attack wasn't just a show of force. It was part of a broader scheme, a prelude to a political play that would justify Earth's annexation. They wanted a scapegoat, and Hunt was the perfect target. A dead human diplomat, killed while provoking the Empire, would serve as the trigger. A faint smirk tugged at his lips. They really don't know what they've started. The next wave of pursuers found themselves stepping into a trap. Hunt had rerouted energy from the facility's lighting system to overload a series of conduits. As they entered the corridor, a series of precisely timed detonations sent them scattering, disoriented and exposed. Hunt moved through the chaos like a shadow, dismantling them with brutal efficiency. His tactics weren't just about survival, they were a statement. Each incapacitated pursuer was left with just enough breath to relay the same chilling message back to their superiors. Tell Kalos, Earth isn't a hunting ground. Kalos, now pacing in his command chamber, growled low. The human was no longer a nuisance. He was a threat. The Admiral issued new orders, deploying his elite operatives. This ends now. Bring me his head. Hunt, meanwhile, intercepted a critical communication using a stolen console. The message detailed the Empire's plan. Earth would be framed as a rogue state threatening galactic stability. The death of a diplomat, combined with fabricated evidence, would rally other species to the Empire's side. Leaning against a battered console, Hunt's eyes hardened as he absorbed the implications. This wasn't just about him. It was about Earth's survival. They should have killed me when they had the chance, he murmured, a grim determination settling over him. He closed the communication, his jaw tight. The game had changed. It wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about turning the tables. The silence inside the Empire's secured facility was unnerving, broken only by the faint hum of alien machinery. Hunt moved with purpose, every step calculated. He'd spent hours studying the schematics he'd stolen during his earlier skirmishes. Each corridor, each access point, was committed to memory. Now it was time to strike back. He crouched by an unguarded panel, prying it open with a shard of metal he'd kept from a broken energy weapon. The Empire's tech was elegant but rigid, designed for their specific physiology and thinking patterns. Hunt had learned that rigidity was their weakness. Wires glowed faintly beneath his hands as he bypassed the panel's security, rerouting power to disable cameras and create a blind spot. As he worked, his mind flickered to a moment buried deep in his past, cold winds howling over a training camp in the Arctic, instructors barking orders as recruits ran drills on fractured ice. They weren't just training for war, they were being forged into weapons. Adapt. Improvise. Survive. Those words had been drilled into him, the mantra replaying with every breath he took. The panel shorted out with a quiet spark, and Hunt slid through the opening into the facility's main data hub. Monitors lined the walls, pulsing with streams of alien script. He'd give anything for a proper team of analysts back on Earth, but for now, he'd make do. He tapped into the central console, fingers moving quickly over the unfamiliar interface. The information pouring onto the screen confirmed what he already suspected. The Empire's fleet was preparing to mobilize. Massive troop movements. Tactical deployments. Earth wasn't just a political target, it was marked for a full-scale invasion. He swallowed the anger rising in his chest and copied everything onto a small, portable drive. But data alone wasn't enough. They needed to feel the cost of their arrogance. Moving deeper into the facility, Hunt began planting small disruptions wherever he could. A few overloaded conduits here. A rerouted energy flow there. Nothing overt, just enough to create fractures in their operations. He adapted each trap to the weaknesses he'd observed, systems that required constant calibration, over-reliance on centralized hubs, and the arrogance of assuming their security was unbreakable. At one point, he came across a massive chamber filled with alien drones, sleek and deadly. Their movements were automated, synchronized, and precise. A thought struck him. Using a severed link from the data hub, Hunt inserted a subroutine into the system. Seconds later, the drones turned on one another, ripping themselves apart in a symphony of destruction. As the facility descended into chaos, Hunt paused in a quiet alcove, catching his breath. The stark contrast between Earth's struggles and the Empire's overindulgence hit him hard. Humanity had clawed its way to survival, building strength from adversity, while the Empire had grown soft, relying on technology to do the thinking for them. He muttered to himself, "They've never fought to survive. Not like we have." Meanwhile, aboard the Empire's flagship, Admiral Kalos stared at the reports flooding his command console. Facility outages. Drone losses. Communications disrupted. The human hadn't just escaped, he was dismantling their operations piece by piece. Kalos's claws tapped against the metal armrest of his chair, his mind racing. How does a primitive species like this adapt so quickly, he growled. A subordinate hesitated before responding. Perhaps they are not as primitive as we assumed, Admiral. The admission hung in the air, heavy with implications. Kalos's jaw tightened. Weakness wasn't tolerated in the Empire, and already he could feel the eyes of his rivals watching for cracks in his authority. He'd promised an easy victory, and now a single human was unraveling the facade. The room grew tense as another officer stepped forward. "Admiral, there's unrest among the Council. Some are questioning the necessity of the operation against Earth." Kalos's eyes narrowed. "Let them question. By the time this is over, Earth will kneel, and they will remember why the Empire rules." Back in the facility, Hunt moved through the carnage he'd created, his eyes scanning for any remaining threats. His traps had done their job, and the facility was in disarray. Security forces scrambled, shouting orders in alien languages, their unity shattered. Hunt approached an outgoing communications console and set up an encrypted signal. His hands worked quickly, sending the data he'd gathered back to Earth's military command. His voice was calm as he recorded a final message: "The Empire wants to break us. Let them try. But first, I'll make sure they regret it." He closed the connection and destroyed the console with a sharp strike from the butt of his stolen weapon. Time was running out. The Empire would regroup soon, and when they did, they'd throw everything at him. That was fine. He wasn't planning to run. Not yet. The command ship loomed in the darkness, a sprawling behemoth of alien design bristling with defenses. Hunt approached with the stolen stealth pod he'd commandeered from the chaos below. The pod was silent, its cloaking field a flickering shadow against the flagship's hull. Timing the patrol patterns, he latched onto an external maintenance port and slipped inside, the faint hiss of the seal breaking the silence. Once aboard, the interior was a stark contrast to the chaos he'd left behind. Gleaming corridors pulsed with energy, every surface vibrating with the hum of advanced technology. Hunt moved quickly, his every step calculated. He'd mapped the ship's layout from the stolen data, knowing exactly where to strike. 2 guards patrolling the adjacent corridor came into view. Hunt crouched, waiting for the perfect moment. As one passed, he lunged, a flash of motion as he incapacitated the first with a precise strike to its breathing apparatus. The second guard spun, raising its weapon, but Hunt was faster. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled a blade fashioned from scavenged alloy, embedding it in the guard's exposed neck. Minutes later, Hunt reached the heart of the ship, the command bridge. Its massive doors loomed before him, sealed tight. He glanced at the access panel, noting the complex alien script running across the interface. Too risky to hack. He rummaged through his gear, pulling out an energy cell he'd modified during his infiltration. He set it against the panel, the crude device sparking to life. The explosion wasn't loud, but it was enough. The doors slid open just as Hunt rolled inside, weapon drawn. Admiral Kalos stood at the center of the bridge, surrounded by a circle of officers and holographic projections. He turned slowly, his reptilian eyes narrowing as they locked onto Hunt. "So," Kalos said, his voice heavy with disdain. "The insect finally crawls into the light." Hunt straightened, his weapon trained on the room. "Funny," he replied, his tone calm. "I was going to say the same thing about you." Kalos waved his officers away, a silent command that left him alone with Hunt. "You've made quite the mess." Impressive, for a species that barely left its own planet. Hunt smirked, lowering his weapon slightly but keeping his guard up. "You know what I've learned about your empire? You think superiority is guaranteed. You've grown soft, relying on technology and fear to do the heavy lifting." Kalos sneered, stepping forward. "And yet, here you are. Alone. Desperate. Do you really think you stand a chance against the might of the Empire?" "I don't think," Hunt said, his voice hardening. "I know." The tension snapped as Kalos lunged, his towering form moving with surprising speed. Hunt sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the claws that raked the air where he'd been. The two circled each other, the room's holographic projections flickering with each strike and counterstrike. Kalos's strength was overwhelming, but Hunt's adaptability turned the tide. He exploited the Admiral's rigid combat style, baiting him into overcommitting. Each time Kalos struck, Hunt countered, using his smaller frame and agility to land precise blows. A makeshift blade slashed at Kalos's exposed arm, drawing dark, viscous blood. "You think brute force wins wars?" Hunt growled, ducking under another swipe. "That's why you'll lose." Kalos roared, swinging wildly, but Hunt was already moving. He feinted left, then surged forward, driving a shock blade into the Admiral's chest. Kalos staggered, his massive frame collapsing onto one knee. Hunt stood over him, his weapon pressed against the Admiral's throat. "This is the part where you expect me to kill you," he said, his voice cold. Kalos glared up at him, defiance burning in his eyes. "Do it, then. Prove you're no different than us." For a moment, Hunt's finger hovered over the trigger. But then he stepped back, lowering the weapon. "No," he said firmly. "I want you alive. I want you to carry a message back to your empire." Kalos struggled to his feet, clutching his wound. "A message," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. Hunt's gaze was unwavering. "Tell them Earth isn't as easy as they think. Next time, they'll face all of us." Without another word, Hunt turned and moved to the command console. His hands flew over the controls, rerouting power to the ship's core. Alarms blared as the system destabilized, the ship's lights flickering ominously. Kalos stumbled toward him, but Hunt was already gone, disappearing into the shadows. Moments later, the ship's power surged, disabling its weapons and propulsion systems. The once mighty flagship was now a stranded hulk, its crew scrambling to regain control. From the safety of his escape pod, Hunt watched the chaos unfold. He activated a secure channel and transmitted one final message to Earth. "Mission incomplete. But they'll think twice before coming back." As the pod disappeared into the void, the flagship's lights dimmed, leaving the Empire to reckon with the warning Hunt had left behind. The aftermath of Hunt's mission rippled through the galaxy like a shockwave. The Empire's once dominant command ship floated powerless in deep space, its systems crippled beyond immediate repair. Whispers spread across the Galactic Senate chambers as news of the debacle reached even the most distant factions. For the first time, the Empire's unshakable confidence was punctured, and at the center of it was one human. In the shadows of the Senate's diplomatic corridors, the murmurs were conflicted. Some factions viewed humanity's defiance as an act of aggression, demanding immediate retaliation. Others saw Hunt's bold stand as evidence of humanity's potential, a species capable of adapting and thriving in adversity. Quiet discussions began to shift the narrative. Maybe humans weren't as primitive as the Empire had proclaimed. Meanwhile, aboard a small stealth cruiser hidden on the fringes of galactic space, Hunt worked tirelessly. The data he had taken from the Empire's flagship was invaluable, a blueprint of their weaknesses, a catalog of their tactical maneuvers, and most importantly, the full scope of their plans to annex Earth. Hunt encoded the information into a secure transmission and sent it to Earth's military command. Intel extracted. "The Empire's plans are in your hands now," he said, his voice calm but edged with fatigue. As the signal faded, he leaned back in his seat, staring out into the expanse of stars. For all the Empire's might, their greatest weakness had been their inability to understand humanity. They thought strength lay in technology, in sheer numbers, in the fear they wielded over weaker species. But humans were different, resilient, unpredictable, and stubborn beyond reason. Hunt had shown them that, and he knew the galaxy wouldn't forget. In the Galactic Senate's Grand Hall, the debate over Earth raged on. A delegate from a neutral faction rose, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Perhaps it is time to reconsider the role of humanity in our galaxy. If one human can bring the mighty Empire to its knees, what could their species achieve with the right alliances?" Admiral Kalos, still recovering from his encounter with Hunt, sat silently in the observation gallery. His wounds burned less than the humiliation he'd endured. He clenched his jaw as the debate turned against the Empire, his mind replaying Hunt's final words, "Earth isn't as easy as you think." The Empire's representatives pushed back, but the cracks in their dominance were becoming evident. The Senate, once unquestioningly loyal to the Empire, began to see an alternative, one where humanity wasn't a subject to be controlled but a force to be reckoned with. Far from the political intrigue, Hunt sat alone in the quiet of his ship. He let the stillness wash over him, his thoughts drifting to the path that had brought him here. The faces of friends lost in secret missions. The endless nights of training, where failure wasn't an option. The hope in the eyes of Earth's leaders when they had entrusted him with this mission. He stared at the scarred palms of his hands, each mark a story of survival. For all his skill, for all his victories, he couldn't shake the weight of what lay ahead. Humanity was rising, but with that rise came the inevitability of greater challenges. The galaxy would not welcome Earth with open arms, not after what he had done. A small hologram flickered to life beside him, displaying a message from Earth's high command. The tone was congratulatory, full of gratitude for his success and the data he'd sent back. Yet, the weight of their words pressed heavily on him. They weren't just thanking him, they were looking to him to lead, to be the tip of the spear in the battles yet to come. Hunt let the message fade and stood, his silhouette outlined by the distant stars. He knew his place wasn't in the limelight, making speeches or shaking hands. His work was done in the shadows, where no one else dared tread. Before he shut down his ship's communication systems, he sent one final encrypted message to Earth's leaders: prepare for what's coming. This is only the beginning. As the ship's engines roared to life, Hunt disappeared into the endless void, leaving behind no trace but a galaxy forever changed. The Empire would lick its wounds and regroup, but they'd never underestimate humanity again. And as whispers of Earth's defiance spread, other species began to see hope in the unlikeliest of allies. The stars were vast, the threats innumerable, but Hunt knew one truth above all: humanity was ready to rise. And he'd make sure they did.